It's been said that if you clip your bird's wings, it's going to be easier to train them. They're not going to fly away. However, all of that is complete rubbish. There is no scientific backing to say that this is better for their welfare. We're doing it for human convenience rather than what's better for the bird. You wouldn't tie a dog to a post and try and bond with them there because that's just crazy, but yet we seem to think it's okay.
A bird can recognize you, bond with you, scream from stress, become depressed from isolation, and spend decades living inside a human environment it was never naturally designed for. And yet, many people still think of birds as relatively simple pets. The reality is that living with intelligent birds is far more emotionally, physically, and ethically complex than most owners ever expect. Today, I'm joined by Sophie, also known as Sophie the Bird Nerd, a bird behavior specialist and trainer passionate about helping people better understand these companion birds and the realities of living with them. We're talking about behavior, screaming, biting, wing clipping, enrichment, indoor living, environment safety, and what ethical bird ownership actually looks like. And I think this conversation will completely change the way many people think about pet birds. Let's get started. Before we actually get into bird behavior and ownership, I'd love to start with you. How did birds become such a huge part of your life?
So I originally had pet ducks. That was when I was about 16 or so, and they were just absolutely wonderful. And I thought, this is awesome. And whilst I was caring for my ducks, I was doing all this research, and I found a local college course that did animal management. I thought, oh, that sounds like a bit of me. So I ended up enrolling at this college, and being exposed to so many animals and different modules and things, I discovered that birds were my thing after all this experience working with them. And now I've been working with birds since 2009, so over 15 years now, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I do love all animals, but birds do have a special place in my heart.
And what birds do you currently share your home with?
So we have a flock of 10, so it's a little bit crazy. We have 4 cockatiels, we have 2 crimson-bellied conures, and we have 4 green-cheek conures. 9 of those 10 are rescue or rehomes, so there's a lot going on, and they definitely take over the house.
I can imagine. I think a lot of people use the word parrot quite broadly, but birds can actually be incredibly different from each other personality-wise, can't they?
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that I love most about birds is how different they are. Even within my flock of 10, within the same species as well, they're all totally individual with their likes and dislikes, preferences, whether they like me or my partner better, what they like to do throughout the day, what snacks they prefer, what training treats. They really are little individual, unique personalities, and that is what makes them so special.
So let's discuss some of the differences between the species that you keep in your home. What are some of the biggest differences you see when you work with or alongside them?
Absolutely. So cockatiels, as a generality, because obviously every bird is an individual, cockatiels are kind of a bit flighty. They can be a bit more what we call neophobic, so they can be a little bit spooked by new things, but they are bundles of fun. They're so smart and very underrated as well. Some people kind of overlook them, but they are so intelligent when you give them a chance. Some of ours have learned how to tidy up their toys by picking them up and popping them into a receptacle, so they're very clever. Some of ours can talk as well. We've got the green-cheek conure, which is my favourite species, although I love all of them equally. They are like the little clowns of the parrot world. They're so funny. They're so mischievous. They're always getting up to mischief. They do tend to be a little bit cuddlier, but again, every bird is different. So some are, some aren't, and that's not a good reason to get a bird either. And then you've got crimson-bellied conures, which are genetically closely related to green-cheek conures, yet they're very, very different. They're very easily overstimulated and heightened. They are a bit more erratic, but they're also incredibly intelligent as well. They have a much stronger bite force. They've got a really stocky beak and they've got a shorter tail. And they're just fantastic, but they are a species I would not recommend to many people because they are certainly some of the most challenging birds that I have worked with.
Oh, how interesting. It must be absolutely fascinating to see those differences, particularly because, you get to experience 3 different sort of behaviors in one home.
Absolutely.
Crazy. So something that really stood out to me looking through all your content is how often you talk about behavior as communication rather than this is bad behavior, this is good behavior. Talk us through what you mean by that.
So when we're looking at behaviour, it's very easy for us to project our own emotions onto it with how we feel, because we can't communicate in the same language as our birds as much as we would love to. Even when they're talking, they don't always do it in context. They don't always know what they're saying. But observable behaviour, which is a big thing in the animal training world, observable behaviour, what you can physically see is what your bird is trying to communicate with you. And the challenging thing when it comes to any parrot species is they have quite subtle body language and behaviour. Some of it can be very kind of overt and, the eye pinning and fluffy heads and big wings and that kind of thing. But there's often lots of behaviour that's missed before that. So when we look at challenging or undesirable behaviours like biting or attacking and flying at people, there's normally what we call precursors to that all before it, which could be very subtle feather positions or changes in body language, leaning back, that kind of thing. And it does take a long time to get to know your own bird. We're still learning even now. There's always more to learn about birds, but they do have this subtle body language, which does take a certain skill to learn over time. But they are always trying to communicate in some kind of way with us. But obviously, we don't speak bird. So we have to find those ways that we can kind of work together to communicate.
I think this resonates because we can see how difficult it is, even in cats and dogs in my experience with them, think they communicate a lot better than, say, birds. But do you think people misunderstand birds because they expect them to behave more like domesticated pets?
Definitely. And that is a big myth as well. Some people think that certain species of parrot are domesticated. No species of parrot is domesticated. That takes thousands of years, multi-generation, changes in the way that they interact with humans and their reliance on humans. It's a population change. We can tame a bird or bond to them and have them become more friendly with us, but they're certainly not domesticated. And we do see that because they don't need us ultimately, and they don't necessarily seek out our companionship, especially when they have conspecifics, so members of the same species. They can absolutely form a bond with us and their friends, but they don't rely on us for that. And I think that people would love their pet parrots sometimes to be like dogs and cats. And this is where sometimes we see some misguided love towards these parrots, where people are, for example, stroking them all over their feathers and their body. And that's nice because we love to stroke our pets and it feels good. However, that causes so many issues. Firstly, our hands are covered in oil, and when we stroke our parrot's feathers, that oil transfers to their feathers and then you can't get it off. It doesn't get removed until they molt those feathers out and then they grow brand new ones. And that, of course, affects, their hygiene, flightability and things like that. But also, when we stroke our parrots on their backs, we're basically telling them that we want to be more than friends, and that's not the impression that we want to be giving to our birds, because that's kind of how they do it with a bird that they really like. So we want to be very careful in the way that we interact with them, and some people want that kind of cat and dog relationship with a parrot, which really isn't compatible. So when we're thinking about whether a parrot is the right kind of pet for us, we need to think, what do we actually want out of this relationship? And if you want a super snuggly, cuddly, fluffy, I want to stroke it all the time, it wants to be with me all the time, maybe we should look at an alternative.
That is so great to hear. I know, because you do have the desire, even, when you're admiring someone else's, to just have a touch. We all want to be able to connect sort of physically and pet them. So what is reasonable contact with a bird, particularly one that you are unfamiliar with?
Of course. So if you're ever meeting a new bird for the first time, for example, I would always try and do what we call protected contact. So this would be where you deliver a treat through the cage bars rather than going straight in with hands, because they've got that beak on their face. They explore the world with a beak. And if you come too close, you're going to get the beak on the end of your finger. If they're willing and receptive to take treats from you, and maybe you build a bond over time with a newer bird and things, then we recommend kind of scritches on the head and the neck. That's what they would do with their friends. That's kind of a very friendly kind of behavior they would have with the rest of the flock. You can help them with their pin feathers and stuff like that. But physical motion kind of stroking all over their body is definitely something that's more than friends. However, there is a nuance to that, which is you can touch other parts of their body for things like husbandry training. Maybe you want to train them to present their wings, so you can have a look underneath. Maybe you want to touch their feet, so you can do voluntary nail trimming, that kind of thing. Those sorts of behaviors are fine. It's usually that kind of constant repetitive motion or just kind of too much contact physically with your bird, which can often lead to problems. And, I mentioned about my green cheek conures being cuddly. Some of them do like a snuggle, but I don't kind of contain them and stroke them and that kind of thing. They kind of cuddle under my ponytail and sit there for a little bit, or to the side of my hand, so I'm not encapsulating them. So it is nuanced, but in general, the head and the neck is usually the best place to say, I want to be your friend, and nothing more than that.
Definitely not the back after your comment. I had no idea. So thank you for teaching me that.
Sure.
So birds are obviously beautiful animals, but living with them is very different to admiring them from a distance. What do you think surprises people most when they actually bring a bird into their home?
I mean, bringing a bird into your home is a massive lifestyle change. And actually, a lot of people don't realise that even until they've done some research after the birds come home, because there's an awful lot of things that you can't have in your house because they are exceptionally dangerous to our birds. A really big one that is in a lot of households is like non-stick cookware. That is something that most people have in their kitchens. However, if you use non-stick cookware, that is basically fatal to your birds because they have such a sensitive respiratory system and a really efficient gas exchange in there as well. So any toxins in the environment, because it's not good for us either, ends up being a very, very serious and very sad outcome for them. And that's the same with a variety of things in our homes, whether that's self-cleaning ovens, air fryers, waffle makers, hair dryers, using household cleaners, candles, wax melts, anything that you might like could potentially be toxic to your bird. And I think that a lot of people don't realise that you really have to kind of change the way that you do a lot of things and the things in your home. It's not just, oh, you know, they're loud all day and there's feathers everywhere and I'm having to make sure they're not chewing the wires. There's lots of things that you might already have in your home that you can't have anymore because actually using them is incredibly serious to our birds. And yes, we probably shouldn't be using these things around other pets as well, but for birds, especially with their effective respiratory system, these things affect them much quicker and in a much serious manner. So it's very much a lifestyle change all around when you have a bird in your life because there's just so many things you can't have anymore.
You look at me, I look at you, I see the love in your eyes.
Health you can see, love you can feel. UltraPet, the science of love.
You hear people describe birds and you made the comment about them being noisy or messy. But I think the deeper challenge is that they're incredibly emotionally and mentally demanding animals. Is that correct?
I would absolutely agree with that. They're very sensitive to changes, disruption. They are sensitive to, you know, their flock members as well. And they are a very social species. So, for example, when we see people who have a single bird and they absolutely love that single bird, and I'm not necessarily against that, you know, people can have one bird and absolutely love them, but we have to think, you know, are we meeting their social needs? Because in the wild, they're living in these huge, great big flocks. And whilst we may have a big family home and we're spending so much time with them and that kind of thing, maybe we have to go out to work. Maybe we want to leave the house for any reason. Maybe we want to live our lives and we leave them. And then our birds are like, where has my flock gone? And normally the only time that happens in the wild is if there's a predator coming. So we have to be aware that they can be very sensitive to all these different things. And we can't communicate with them that I'm just going to work, you know, to earn money to pay for your treats and toys. I'm coming back. They might be like, well, I don't understand where you're going. This is really scary. And as I said, they aren't sensitive to change. And when we see something that's going on across the world now, which is this huge crisis when it comes to parrots being in rescue and rehoming centres, these birds are passed from centre to centre, home to home. One of my green cheeks, Scampy, we adopted her when she was 8 months old and we were her fourth home at only 8 months old. So it really is a crisis. Rescues are overflowing with parrots at the moment. There's no room for any more. And yet, you know, these birds still need help. So it's really, really difficult to live with. So I would urge anybody who is interested in living and sharing their life with a parrot to really experience them firsthand before even bringing one home, because it's very different to seeing these cute things online, maybe even on my channel or social media, even AI these days. It's not the same as actually spending 24/7 with them. It's very, very different.
And I mean, when you neglect some of these emotional needs, what are the typical signs that you're seeing?
So we do see more undesirable behaviour. That can be things like excess screaming. We might see increased biting. And then we have what we call the cycle of unmet needs, where your bird is, displaying this undesirable behaviour. So the owner checks out and gives them less attention and meets less of their needs. So then the bird does more of it. And then the owner checks out more. And it just goes round and round instead of addressing the root cause of why this bird is stressed. And then the other thing that we do see an awful lot of is feather destructive behaviour. And that can be plucking, that can be barbering, where a bird chews their feathers as well. And the challenging thing with that is a really complex issue to work through. It can go on for a long time. Sometimes it can peak and trough with, periods of stress that may come about. It may kind of trigger it again. And also after a bird has done that for some time, they actually damage the feather follicles. So the feathers are actually, after a while, not able to regrow again. So they really do take it out on themselves, and they really do express these undesirable behaviours in quite extreme ways to really communicate that I'm struggling with my environment. And it's down to us to work out why that's happening and what we can do to help them as well.
I mean, the feather plucking, is that something like we see in dogs that is a self-soothing thing? What is the underlying reason why they do feather pluck?
Yeah, so it definitely acts in a similar way. The actual act of physically plucking out that feather releases all those pleasure sensations in the brain for that split second. But then afterwards it hurts, and then it becomes irritated. And then we do it more to try and work out, where the irritation is. And then it's this cycle of they keep doing it, and it just goes on and on and on. And it is very difficult to break. And we do see this a lot in our consultations that we do with our business best behaved birds. We're seeing a lot of this. I even have one of my birds who came to me previously as a barbering bird and a plucking bird. And very occasionally we'll see a spike in that if there is a period of stress for any reason, because it's one of those things when they learn to do it and they get these sensations, it can become habitual as well. So even when the initial stressor has gone, they can still do it. So it's a really difficult behaviour, and it doesn't make anyone a bad bird owner if their bird does do it. It's really difficult to work with them. And even if you rescue a bird and you're giving them the most amazing life possible, sometimes it can just still happen. And it's one of those difficult things with our birds. Unfortunately, they can still do it.
And I mean, I know obviously as a vet, particularly earlier on in my career, of the kind of workup that's involved with these feather plucking birds, trying to manage, is there an underlying mite issue, what are the husbandry conditions? And it's, like you say, it can be a very difficult thing to get to the root cause of, and then a management strategy in order to get them out of this behavior. So I can imagine that, this is also a reason why people then just want to give up. There's a financial burden to this.
Definitely. Parrots are one of the most expensive pets to keep. And unfortunately, when it comes to avian vet care, that's also super expensive because, we have to pay for the fact that it's very specialised care. Our avian vets have been studying for many, many years, and they are specialised in their field, and that does come with an additional cost. We also need to be aware that avian vets are not always super close. If you're really lucky, maybe you'll have one maybe within half an hour's drive. Maybe they could be 2 hours drive away. If they're longer than that, we should be considering whether we should be keeping parrots in our specific homes, because can we get them there in an emergency? Do you have emergency options as well? With my guys, I'm actually registered at a variety of different vets, so we've got options just in case there's a problem. Yeah. But avian vet care is one of those barriers, absolutely, to keeping parrots. And unfortunately, that does end up being a barrier to keeping parrots for some people, because they can be ongoing things. And, we never judge anybody for having struggles in their lives, for needing to relinquish pets. But it is one of those realities, especially in the current economic crisis, that it can be really difficult to manage meeting everybody's needs, especially when you do have animals with very complex issues going on.
Yeah. And I mean, you made mention of it. A lot of the signs that you see both behaviorally and medically are very subtle. Can we talk a little bit more about that and why it's so important that when you spot one of these things, that you do seek either behavioral or medical attention?
The thing with parrots is they are a prey species. So in the wild, what's going to keep them safe is hiding any signs of discomfort and illness, because then a predator is less likely to pick them off. Unfortunately, that makes our lives really hard, because they can't just say, I'm not feeling so good today. They are trying to mask that as long as possible. And normally when it gets to the point where they're showing really obvious physical signs that they're not feeling so good, that could be tail bobbing, it could be a discharge from any of the nares or the mouth or things like that, really kind of struggling to breathe, lethargy, maybe going down to the base of the cage, all these kinds of things that we might see from that are really obvious signs of being unwell. That is where we're like alarm bells ringing, but actually it's probably been going on for some time. And when we get to that point, it can be very difficult to support and treat a bird when it's got to that point. There are some things, however, that are birds can't hide these things, and that can be the weight on the scale. So we recommend weighing our birds quite frequently. Every day is best, but it's not always possible. So we recommend at least, a couple of times a week if possible. Once a week is, better than nothing. And we recommend the best time of day to do it is first thing in the morning, after they've done their giant morning poo that they've held in overnight, but before you give them their breakfast. So it's kind of a really consistent time, because if you weigh your bird in the morning one day and then in the evening another day, it's going to be quite a few grams difference. And if you're like me, you're going to be freaking out and you're going to be calling the vet like, what's going on? So we want to make sure that we're being really mindful of our data collection. And you can also do things like fecal tests. We do those from home. We collect a pool sample, send it off to the lab. I can get some results. And if anything flags up, I can send that to my vet, go in and check it out. But it is so important. If you notice anything that doesn't look quite right with your bird, go and get them checked out, because if you do leave it, then it's going to be much worse for you and your bird. It is going to be more expensive as well, probably. And I would much rather personally, and I have done this before, is to take my bird to the vet and be told everything's fine, you're just overreacting, than to leave it and be like, okay, now this is really serious and we really have to get involved with lots of diagnostics and lots of serious tests because my bird is super sick. So it's that balance of not only the observable behaviour when it comes to training, but also observable behaviour in terms of your parrot's overall health and welfare as well.
It's incredible, because I like when we see a lot of our patients come in and the owners recognize that they're not well, we kind of get that sinking feeling when you see them at the bottom of the cage, and trying to also just explain, particularly with new bird owners, that this is really serious. So what are some of the subtle signs from your experience that you would say, that's just not quite right and worth getting checked out?
So for me, it might be that maybe my bird takes a treat from me, but then they just kind of spit it on the floor. They don't really eat it, or maybe they'll just kind of crunch it a little bit and drop it on the floor. Maybe they're less engaged to train. Maybe they're just a little bit more agitated. Maybe they're normally a kind of a cuddlier bird and we offer that and they kind of lean away or kind of give the beak a little bit but don't bite. Maybe they're just a little bit more irritable. They could be sleeping a little bit more, even just having a look at their tail. So birds will have a very slight tail bob because of the way that they actually breathe. They have to physically move their body because they don't have a diaphragm. But that kind of tail bob normally becomes more pronounced if they're trying to work harder to breathe. And that's normally one of those. It's kind of obvious, but kind of not. You need to know what's normal for your own bird. But once you start seeing that, you can start thinking, there's a few things that are adding up here. Sleepiness, maybe lack of interest in food, or again, what we see with parrots is they'll kind of beak around the food, but then they won't actually eat anything. And then you see that in their feces. You either see less feces or you see an increase in urine, which we call polyuria. That can be a sign of stress or a sign of discomfort as well. Maybe they're drinking more. There's a lot of things that can be going on. It's really difficult because you're always worrying all the time that, what's wrong with them now. But yeah, it's always about knowing what's important for your individual bird. And, when you've got 10 like me, you're always on it thinking, is this normal? What am I seeing here? I keep notes on my phone just in case anything's not quite right. And then I can refer back to that and be like, oh, it was just a little blip. Or if it's not, then I'm going to get on the phone to my avian vet.
I love the daily weight checks that you advise. But how would you do it if you're a new, you're very experienced, and I can just imagine your morning routine getting all your birds weighed. It must be an incredible scene. But if you are a bird owner, how do you train them to stand on the scale? What kind of scale are you using? And are there any great apps that you can track these kind of things? Can you use just, like one of the apps that you use for yourself and just enter your bird's name?
Yeah,
so how you go about it.
Yeah, there are a few different apps and things. I tend to keep notes on my phone, or I have a whiteboard in my kitchen for a variety of my animals because I have reptiles and invertebrates as well. And I'll keep like their average weight on the board, so I can be like, oh, that's different, or that kind of thing. And I can track that from there. But I normally keep notes on my phone. You could do a spreadsheet if you wanted to. But we typically use a kitchen scales, one that's accurate, because again, sometimes they can be a little bit funky. So you want to make sure that it's definitely an accurate weight. And then we put a T-perch on top of it so our birds can kind of sit comfortably on top of the scale. And then in order to train that, we need to have a solid step up with our birds, because again, a lot of people think that birds should just step up, and that's just something that they do. However, that is a formal trained behaviour. So we want to ask them to step onto us and give them a treat, step off again to give them the treat. And once they understand that process of stepping up gets them something yummy, and we've done some desensitization work with the scary scales, we can then ask them if they would like to step onto the scales. And normally I will go and, prep the waters and the breakfast and things bring those in and then kind of do it cage by cage, so that I'm kind of working through the different birds and that sort of thing. And if they don't want to do it, maybe we can try it later, maybe we can try it the next day. But we want to make it a really fun experience. They're always getting something yummy afterwards, so it's worth stepping on the scales in the first place.
That's great. So it's a really, really great advice. I love the perch thing, because I mean, often, even if you've got a patient here, we like trying to pop them directly on the scale and they're moving off and they're straight. So that's really, we'll be using that. So, I mean, we'll go back into some of the husbandry issues and recommendations shortly, but I want to talk a little bit more about just general homes. Do you think us living in modern homes can naturally meet birds and what they need well? Is this something that you often discourage owners to take on a bird because their environment is just not going to be conducive to a healthy lifestyle for their bird?
Sure. I think it would be irresponsible for me to say don't get a bird. I'm not trying to gatekeep here. I've got 10 of my own, right? But as I said, 9 of those are rescue rehomes. But I think if we're all being honest here, that probably 90% of people, maybe even 95% of people, probably shouldn't open their home to a parrot, because you do have to commit to these lifestyle changes. You do have to commit to finding people who can look after your birds if you want to go anywhere, whether that's on holiday or out for the night or something. You need to make sure that somebody who's looking after your bird maybe knows about these subtle signs of being unwell, knows that certain things shouldn't be in the home, knows not to feed them avocado, for example, because just a single bite of avocado can be fatal for some birds. It's really, really toxic, and not a lot of people know that, unfortunately. It's not an easy thing. And whilst, I've mentioned that rescues are overflowing, that does happen because people get birds and they don't necessarily know the challenges that come with sharing their lives with them, which is why I do recommend, if you want to open your home to a parrot, go and experience them in real life. Go and hear how loud macaws are. I've been working with birds for a long time and I have tinnitus. I've got hearing damage from being around parrots all the time because it's a lot. Some days you have bad days and you're like, I really wish that they would just be quiet for a moment. They don't have an off switch. So it's a real case of, have you got the patience to live with a parrot who isn't going to be quiet when you've got a headache or something like that? There does need to be an area of financial responsibility as well, because we do have a responsibility to these birds to give them vet care when they need it. We can't just say, well, there's not enough pennies in the bank. That's not fair on them. We need to make sure that we've got things in place to look after them. But the other thing we need to be aware of is whether our life stage is right to welcome a parrot into our homes. There's a couple of things that we see a lot, whether that's parents wanting to get a bird for their children, which sounds fun, it sounds great having a little cockatiel or a budgie, playing with the kid and stuff. But then that child is going to grow up and go through school and maybe have extracurricular activities. Maybe they've got hobbies and they've got things to do elsewhere. Maybe when they grow up, they want to travel the world. Maybe they go into rented accommodation. Maybe they go for a job on the other side of the world. All these life changes can happen and your bird doesn't understand that. They just want a stable place where they feel like they're going to be safe. So sometimes we need to think about what is actually going to happen in the future, not just the right now when we're getting parrots. And equally for our friends who are in their golden years of life, should we be getting a parrot who maybe has a lifespan of 60 to 80 years? And, if we've got family who are involved in the care, then fine. But if we're on our own, is that a really good choice for us? And is that going to be a good choice for our birds, especially when we talk about how emotionally intelligent they are?
Yeah. And I mean, it's a reality that, as a parent, if you're going to be taking on a bird with your child, you need to accept that they're probably going to end up your pet. I think most parents accept that. But if, like you say, you're getting a parrot, that's a very long-term commitment. So it's really great advice that you're giving. We were talking about the general household. I'm just interested because obviously in the UK, I lived there both in Scotland and in London and in Devon. The houses and some of the accommodation, or a lot of the accommodation I lived in was in close proximity to my neighbor. Mm-hmm. And whilst I wouldn't mind, a barking dog or a bird squawking or whatever, how often do you
complaints
from neighbors?
Luckily, we haven't. Our neighbours are very accommodating, but it is something, even last week I had somebody who was looking hopefully for me to take on their birds. Unfortunately, I can't, and I get offered birds on a weekly basis and I would love to, but I've not got the space. But people often do have these issues where they get their birds and maybe they have to move somewhere else and they move there and their neighbours are like, I can't cope with this noise. And then ultimately it's, do we move somewhere else? Can we move somewhere else? Or what am I going to do with this bird? And of course, there are lots of different training techniques and increasing foraging and building skills and things to keep our birds quieter, but they are still loud animals. Especially with your macaws or the Nande conure, which is a smaller bird, but it is the loudest of all of the parrots. It's equivalent to like a jet engine. It's super, super loud. You do need to be aware of that and be mindful of your surroundings, because, there are lots of birds I would love to have and I'd love to have them all, but, I can't have them where I am right now. So it's about kind of taking ownership and responsibility of your own circumstances and what you can manage, and also being mindful of the environment and what impact that might have and the future impact too, especially, for example, whether you're renting or if you own your own property, that will have an impact on whether or not you're allowed a parrot in the first place. But also, if you get told that they're being too noisy, there's obviously more implications if you are renting a property as well. So it can be difficult, especially when you live in close quarters with people. But, some people like it too. Some people think it's fun. It's all about building a good rapport with your neighbours too.
Yeah, make friends with your neighbours before you get a bird. Test the waters. So you made mention, we've spoken a little bit about air quality, but why are things like air quality, lighting, routine, and noise so important for birds?
Definitely. Air quality is a massive one. As I mentioned, they have a very efficient gas exchange in their respiratory system. So what might, maybe slightly irritate us is going to really irritate them. So we have air purifiers in our homes, and I have to hoover them weekly because there's so much dust, not only from the environment because of just the way that we live, but also from the birds themselves. Many parrots have this powdery down. Many just have feather dust. You've got your cockatiels and your African greys, which tend to produce more powdery down, and that can be really irritating. So again, that's another thing to consider if you would like to welcome a parrot into your home, is do you have any respiratory issues of your own? Because that can be incompatible with living with parrots, because they are super dusty, super messy. There's feathers everywhere. So we do need to be making sure the air quality is very good for them. I have an app on my phone, so I'm always checking that, but it's always good because I want to make sure that they're doing well. But that's where we come into these things like not having candles and wax melts and air fresheners. Even the natural ones is not good for them because they're going to be breathing in and absorbing far more of those things than we would as well. And then when it comes to lighting too.
Before you go to lighting,
Yeah.
Can I ask you to expand on just general ventilation? Because obviously in the UK, I know, and I'm just talking about from my experience, with heaters on and changing the temperatures and stuff, often you don't have good ventilation because you want to keep the windows closed. It's cold. So how do you manage ventilation in homes?
So the air purifier does play a huge role in ventilation. It does help to circulate the air, but ultimately every home needs to have fresh air come into it for reducing the likelihood of mildew and mold and that kind of thing, as well as just getting that fresh airflow. So the best thing to do, obviously you can't have your windows open if you've got your parrots out and about because that is incompatible. They're going to be straight out the window. Is if they are having some in cage or in aviary time, maybe have the windows open then so you can have the breeze coming through. Or it's normally a good idea, maybe first thing in the morning, 5 minutes, open all the windows when they're in their cages, get all that fresh air in first thing in the morning, and then close them all. Even during winter, it's still a really good thing to do for their health, your health, the health of the home as well. That's normally the best way to do it. Some people have built these wonderful contraptions of kind of mesh things all over their windows and stuff so they can have them open, but it's not very common here. So it's normally better to kind of air the house once or twice a day, just for a few minutes, just to kind of change the actual air in there, and then really invest in air purifiers. It's one of the things that I think is a massive investment for any parrot owner, no matter whether you've got one budgie or 10 macaws. Every bird owner should have an air purifier in the home.
Perfect. Sorry to break your
it's all good.
Process there.
I can just talk for ages, so it's fine.
No, I love it. So you were about to, I think you were going to go on to lighting and we were talking about routine.
So when it comes to lighting, I think that UV lighting is becoming more and more important for parrots. It is, again, one of those things that's nuanced because you need to get a bird-safe UV light. You need to make sure that it isn't too close to them, because having UV lights too close can cause a variety of issues, whether that's skin burns or eye problems and things like that. You need to make sure that the wires are not accessible, because if there is, they're just going to chew them. It's just what they do. They're like drawn to them like a moth to a flame. We need to be making sure that those bulbs are changed depending on the manufacturer's guidelines, whether that's once a year or once every 6 months. But also having a look at the manufacturer's recommendations. It's something that we delved into a lot, because UV is awesome, but the manufacturers often say have it on for 12 hours a day, and then the lights are off for 12 hours a night when they're going to sleep. However, they also say that having the lights on for a long time is great for encouraging breeding behaviour. So do we want to have breeding behaviour in our homes? Probably not. So maybe having the UV lights on for a few hours. Or ideally, the ultimate one, which is very difficult to do in the UK, is take your bird out into the sunshine in a safe way, whether that's in a travel carrier or on a harness, or if your bird is professionally free flight trained, you can take them outside for actual sunlight, because birds only need about sort of 20 minutes here or there, once or twice a week or more, preferably. But, again, if you live in the UK, it's currently raining right now, so we can't always take them out. But natural sunlight is always going to be best. If you have an outdoor aviary in your garden, that's always going to be awesome too. But having UV lights in our homes is important, but equally being aware of our own lighting in our homes is super important. A lot of people don't realise that parrots actually see in a higher frame rate than we do. So whilst all these lights look lovely, when we actually take our phones and we go on slow-mo video mode and we film the lights in our homes, quite often you might see that they're flashing like this. And there is a high likelihood that that is what your parrot is seeing when you're having certain lights on in your homes. And then you think, why don't they want to be in this area? Why are they more erratic? And it's probably because it's like a big rave dance party with all these lights flashing. So think about, the lighting in your home, test it. And the lighting for our birds too is very, very important.
So it's fascinating. And in terms of routine, I mean, is it important to stick to a routine? Is it bad to get into a routine how important is routine in wild birds versus in a home?
Sure. So wild birds don't have too much of a routine apart from, sun up, sun down. Things are very variable out there. And the wild is not this kind of Disney-esque, wonderful fairy tale place. It's a really harsh environment full of parasites and predators and humans doing horrible stuff like, catching parrots and taking them into the illegal pet trade and things. So the wild is not great. But in our homes, we need to be, again, mindful about how sensitive our birds are. So some people will say, no routine at all. Routine is terrible. Some people say they must have routine. It's awesome. I like to kind of sit in the middle. I like to kind of be a bit more balanced. We find that parrots tend to enjoy and feel safe with a little bit of routine. So we try and keep kind of wake up time and sleepy time the same. And we try and keep roughly meal times the same. So they kind of know where those core resources are coming. So it's not kind of a stressful thing like, when's my dinner coming? Is it coming at all? But everything else, like your training, enrichment, interactions with us, all of that is totally random and variable. And that keeps things really interesting. So all that good reinforcing stuff can be variable. It keeps our birds adaptable to change. But we don't want to be so rigid that we can't have any change. And the bird's like, it's 1 minute past one. Where's my dinner? I'm going to freak out. And also, birds who have no routine, it's really hard to give them that stability that they may need in order to maybe settle into a new home. Sometimes building those routines can also help them to just live with us cohesively as well.
I mean, it's a fascinating conversation because, of course, we were talking about the ability to be able to go away even for a short period of time, and teaching someone else your routine and trying to them to actually now adapt to a different person in the home while you have a break, as well as an alteration in the routine must be really difficult and really stressful. But at the same time, you can imagine, like you said, be able to go to bed at the right time. They're sort of anticipating these sorts of things, and so if they don't happen, they feel out of sorts. So it's a very, very interesting subject, and I'm sure stuff you consult on quite a lot.
Definitely. People are just trying to find these ways of giving their birds the best possible lives, and we commend them for that. And there's no shame in needing to reach out to somebody to give you a hand, whether that's to your avian vet for advice or whether it's to a certified professional bird trainer like myself. Sometimes you just need that extra support because, as I mentioned, we're always learning. I never feel like I've learned enough. There's always more to learn. There's always changes in husbandry, new ideas that are coming out, different things to do. You don't want to be one of those people who's like, I've always done it this way, so that's just the way it's going to be. We always want to think about what can we do better? How can we do better? And one of those ways is just building on how are we filling our birds' activity budgets. And what I mean by that is, what are they actually doing all day? Because we often see this debate online of, I'm the better bird owner because my bird's out 24/7 and your bird's in the cage for 5 minutes, so you're terrible. It doesn't make any sense. What are your birds actually doing all day? Because sometimes we see birds who are out of the cage all day, but they're not actually doing anything. They're just kind of sat there like a perched potato. Whereas birds who have some in cage time, some out of cage time, lots of playtime, exercise and flight and things like that, that's far more valuable because they're doing bird things. They're not just sat there and not knowing what to do with themselves. So skill building and teaching birds how to be birds is a big part of looking after them.
So is this where you get the buzz term enrichment? Is this emotional and physical enrichment for your birds?
Yeah, enrichment is essentially something that is physically or mentally stimulating for an animal. So, and there's a wide variety of things when it comes under the umbrella of enrichment. Foraging is a huge one because in the wild, parrots would spend about 50 to 70% of their waking day looking for food, foraging. But there's other forms of enrichment that are really important, whether that is the enrichment when it comes to parrot toys. And just because it says parrot toy in the label doesn't mean your bird knows what to do with it. You may need to teach them how to interact with these different items. It can be different perching options because we know that they spend all day on these 2 feet. Or one of my green cheeks has 1 leg. So she spends all day on 1 leg and she's got her platform perches to lay down on when she wants to. But, we want to be making sure they've got the enrichment of having different things to stand on and climb over. We want to be thinking about the social enrichment. Who are they interacting with? Is it us? Do they have a companion or a little flock? There's lots of different things. Even there's some emerging ideas that maybe we originally thought that parrots couldn't smell very well, but actually there's some emerging evidence that maybe they can smell a little bit better than we thought. So should we be looking at scent enrichment? There's a huge umbrella of terms, and it is a huge thing that is so important to keeping them stimulated, is giving them different novel things to interact with and also ways to access food. Because if you're offering your bird food every single day in a bowl, they're going to go chomp, 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 5 minutes done. Now what am I going to do with my day? We want to be thinking about how can we keep them busy, because a busy bird is going to be a tired bird who is going to be less likely to experience some of these undesirable behaviours.
Yeah. And there are inexpensive ways, obviously, of providing this. I mean, what's some of the advice? I mean, rotation of toys, using boxes, homemade toys. Are there some sort of suggestions you can make to our listeners?
Yeah, definitely. It doesn't have to be expensive. You can use things around the house. One of the things that we like to do is paper cupcake cases. So not plastic coated, just paper. And we'll put like a piece of nut in there and then we'll scrumple it all up like a lollipop. And our connies have a great time waving it around and shredding it out to get the nuts. Or maybe you have bought an expensive bird toy and your bird has destroyed it. You don't have to throw it away. Get those toy parts, put them into a little bowl and they can, again, throw the toy parts around. Or if you have these little rattan balls, you can, again, stuff some of their favourite treats in there. Even something as simple as taking a piece of paper, chopping it into tiny little pieces and then putting it over their food bowl. So they're having to move this paper out of the way just to access their food. If your bird is an inexperienced forager, they don't play with toys, that's a really easy way of just getting them to think and actually physically manipulate their environment to try and find that food in a very easy way. And then you can make it more complex. But, some of the other things that we love to do with our flock is foraging trays. So we'll just get like a simple serving tray. Maybe you've even got one in the kitchen already, or a plate or something. Again, sprinkling maybe some yummy treat seeds on there, maybe some dried flower parts like chamomile. Maybe we'll put a bit of crinkle paper, again, that came with one of the bird toys, maybe some toy parts, and let them go to town on it. And once you've taught your bird how to do it, they have so much fun just moving stuff out of the way, kicking it around and throwing stuff around to find those snacks. And again, it's really getting them thinking and problem solving. You can see the little cogs turning in their brain, like, where's the next snack coming? So have a look around your house, look for natural materials or safe materials, which is things like paper and cardboard that's not glossy, or any kind of paper products generally are fine to use, especially if they're food safe. So things that you find in the kitchen, like your paper cake cases. We also get mini espresso cups, which is just paper, or paper straws that are not plastic coated. All of these things can be crafted and they tend not to be too expensive, especially if you've already got them in your kitchen already.
Can we talk a little bit about house hazards? I mean, I know we've spoken a little bit about the Teflon or the nonstick pans, candles and things, but are there other things in the house that potentially are high risk that people just don't think about until there's a problem?
Absolutely. What isn't a risk is more a better question. So a lot of things that people don't realise, even leaving the toilet seat lid up, that is a body of water. And for a small bird flying into there, crash landing by accident, that is a recipe for disaster. Similarly, bodies of water, thinking about pots and pans on the stove. If you're cooking, have your bird in their safe place, whether that's a bird room, aviary, cage, whatever it may be. Don't have your bird out when you're cooking because they're just looking for danger. It's like something in them. They're just always looking for something cheeky and naughty to do. Closing doors, opening doors, that sort of thing. There's been lots of accidents where people haven't realised a bird is out and then toes get caught, windows being open, like we've mentioned already, people not communicating. When me and my partner are having the birds out, it's like a military operation. I'm like, are the windows shut? I'm going to check anyway. And then we make sure that they're all shut before we get the birds out. But another thing that we're seeing more and more, especially with social media, with kind of cutesy videos, is letting our birds interact with dogs and cats. So we know that dog and cat saliva is toxic to our birds, even human stuff. Human saliva is not good for our birds. But they are predators and birds are prey, and having them interact, all it takes is that split second for an accident or rough play or anything like that, even if they've been friends for years. It's a really common issue that we're seeing more and more of, because people see these cutesy videos on social media and think, oh, I'd love them to have a little snuggle, or the bird's going to ride around on the dog's back. But actually, it really is that accident waiting to happen. So there are a wide variety of household dangers when it comes to keeping our birds, and all we can do is our very best to mitigate them by being really mindful of how our birds interact with the home as well, where they like to perch or where they like to get into mischief and that kind of thing.
Can we have the conversation about birds and children?
Yes.
Because obviously this is, as a mother, I know, in fact, I will share it with you and my listeners that my son has nagged me for a bird for a very, very long time. We now have chickens as a compromise, which are, for me, I think, fulfilling the need. But we have cats. And obviously, as you just made mention, dogs, cats, and birds are not always conducive. So I also know from a young age, he always had this desire, and I think, this comes to us not putting our birds in a position where they're going to be mishandled or brushed in the wrong way, or handled or squashed. So how do you advise parents or households when it comes to managing their children with birds?
I think you put it quite well earlier that, it's essentially, it's not the child's pet, it's going to be the adult's pet. And that needs to be really clear that, they are responsible, and having that conversation of, if you want the bird to come out, you need to speak with me, and then we will get the bird out together. If you do have a particularly cheeky or persistent child, maybe you do need to put some sort of like carabiner clip or lock on the cage just to make sure that everybody is staying safe. But, teaching your bird how to interact softly with parrots, teaching them that they're not like dogs and cats, and you can't stroke them and cuddle them and squish them and that kind of thing, because they're very sensitive. They've got hollow bones. So you can only imagine, just the slightest accident can be very, very serious. But also, just teaching them, start them learning about bird body language, hone in those observational skills. It's a great transferable skill for them as they get older. Teach them when the bird is saying no. If the bird is flying away or backing off, we can say, okay, they don't want to play right now. Maybe we can do it later. Maybe we can teach them how to interact with the bird through the cage bars. So if they're not allowed to come out right now, what could they do instead? So that's why we like target training, where a bird has to touch their beak very gently to the end of the stick through the cage bars or out of the cage, depending on how we're doing it. And then they get a little treat. So they can have a little training session and learn those skills as well. But it is a delicate subject, I think, because children can be very persistent. They really want to have these pets and stuff like that. My nephew is really obsessed with parrots at the moment, and I've had to tell my sister, just don't do it, because I'm going to end up with a bird. We have to be very, very sensitive when it comes to having these conversations, because, there are some people out there who see some birds as disposable, and also there is a huge issue with the concept of starter birds or beginner birds. People think, oh, we'll get a starter bird, a little bird, and then we can then graduate onto a larger bird. Or I've had people say they're going to trade in their bird for a bigger bird. Now they've had the little bird for a while, and it's like, I think the little birds are kind of better than the bigger birds, but they're not disposable. They have feelings, and that is something sometimes we do see when we have our younger parrot enthusiasts as well.
Yeah, I can understand how they get to that, but it's awful. Like you say, there's such a need for homes, and the rehoming situation is dire. So that's a terrible starter bird. Is quite a scary conversation. Mm-hmm. We obviously, this applies to both adults, us, and children. But the other huge issue that I hear a lot is biting, because people often take bites very personally. And obviously with children, that bite, especially if it's a parrot, can cause quite a lot of damage. Mm-hmm. How do you handle biting behaviorally?
So biting is a form of communication. They're basically telling you, I don't want something that's happening in the environment right now. It's really obvious and overt communication. But as we mentioned before, there's going to be a lot of precursors that led up to that bite. They don't just do it. It's really energy intensive. There's always other body language. And unfortunately, sometimes when you have a bird who perhaps has experienced some trauma in the past or hasn't been listened to in the past, kind of like when you see it with dogs as well, they literally go from 1 to 100. And it is literally like a bite like that. And we have to start teaching our birds that actually you can show us some of these subtle signs that you don't want to participate before you need to escalate it to a bite. And what we always say is a really big thing to think about when it comes to parrot behaviour is every behaviour has a reason. Birds don't just do things for the sake of it. No animal does things for the sake of it. There's always a reason. And unfortunately, sometimes people anthropomorphize, so project their own emotions onto these birds, and they say, well, he's being stubborn, he's being difficult, he's being lazy, he's dominating me, all these kinds of things. All of those labels are rubbish because they don't describe the observable behaviour. All they're doing is you're projecting your own emotions onto the bird to try and decipher what's going on. But actually, we need to be looking at what the consequence of that bite is as well, because animals do things to either gain something pleasurable or remove something uncomfortable. So are they trying to gain attention by biting you? Is that something that's, really fun? Or are they trying to get you to back away from them because they don't want to participate in whatever you're offering them right now? Often that gets people to move away when they get bitten. Or a really big thing that we've seen a lot in our consultations is if the bird wants a free taxi ride to the cage and they've previously been put in the cage when they've been bitten, they know that they need to just go and bite somebody and they'll go straight back to the cage and shut the door. And obviously that's a problem because we want the cage to be like their bedroom and their safe space. But if we're treating it like a punishment, there's a whole host of things that are just going wrong in those scenarios. And biting is probably one of the number one, or at least in the top three challenges that we work through with our consultations, because it's very common. Birds explore the world with their beaks. And unfortunately, sometimes they do it a little bit hard. So if you're experiencing a biting parrot, of course, consult a professional, but we want to be working out what they're actually trying to tell you. What are they trying to gain or remove? And what in that environment is setting up to happen? Are they on a high sugar and fat diet and they've got all these excess calories and all this energy and they don't know what to do with themselves? Are they not understanding what you're asking of them? Is the training challenging? Are you maybe being a bit too excitable in wanting to interact when maybe they're saying no? There's a huge amount of reasons why birds bite, but there's always a reason for it. And really getting down to that, understanding of why they're doing it is kind of the first part of solving it as well.
So I had a question from one of my followers, knowing that I was going to chat to you today, about their cockatiel. And she was describing that when she has a good relationship, she only has one bird, and when it sits on her shoulder, everything seems fine. And suddenly he, I think it was he, will attack her earrings or attack her ear. And wants to know firstly, why that's happening and how to handle it, because otherwise the bird is very behaviorally sound.
Mm-hmm. We do see this a lot. Sometimes it could be that the jewelry, the earrings are exciting. I don't wear earrings anymore because I know that my birds will rip them out and that's not going to be fun for anybody. Sometimes it is something as silly as maybe your hair's there and the hair has touched them and they're like, don't touch me, I don't like that. And then they bite you because they're kind of redirection that bite onto your neck instead of, or your ear because your hair touched them. Sometimes it can be for attention. Sometimes they want to do something else. And again, they want that taxi ride over there. There's a huge variety of things. Sometimes maybe they're just a bit agitated or something, and it is that redirection onto you because you're the closest thing there. What we tend to say is I have no issue with birds being on heads or shoulders or anything like that. Some people do, I don't, I think that's fine. But we want to have a really reliable and consistent step up and step off or target training as well. So if they are being a pest for any reason, maybe they are biting, we can ask them to come off and go and redirect them onto something else. Maybe we could do a quick training session, or maybe you can go and do some foraging instead. Do something instead of biting me. And maybe work on that step up and step off. But also we don't want to have our birds on us too much because, again, sometimes that can lead to excess hormonal behaviour. They're spending too much close contact with us. It's a fine line. And that's sometimes what we see with single birds too, because they want to be with us all the time because we're their flock, which is why I'm very passionate about having a multi-bird flock, clearly, with 10. So there's never just kind of one answer of, how to work through these challenges. What we say is we look at like a holistic approach with our birds. So it's never we jump on a consult and say, this is what you do, job done, thanks for booking. It's normally we're peeling back all the different layers of what's actually going on in the environment, what the diet looks like, the cage setup, the enrichment and that kind of thing, just to actually work out why this is happening in the first place and how to work through it as well.
Absolutely. Understanding the context before you make recommendations is so important. So one topic that creates a massive amount of debate online, I'm sure you can anticipate what I'm going to ask you, is wing clipping. Mm-hmm. Why has this become such an emotional conversation in the bird world?
So for me, I am not somebody who likes confrontation. I steer away from it. I'm very balanced. However, wing clipping is something that I'm incredibly passionate about discouraging at all costs. Wing clipping is one of those things that's been a very traditional process. It's been said that if you clip your bird's wings, it's going to be easier to train them. They're not going to fly away, so that's good. So you're going to keep them safe. However, all of that is complete rubbish. And also it is detrimental to their physical and mental well-being as well. So when we look at wing clipping in terms of does it make them easier to train, it may look like that on the surface, but that's normally because they can't get away. They can't actually display those escape behaviors. They can't say no when you're trying to train them because they can't physically get away. You know, flying is a big part of their locomotion. So that's why often people think, oh, it's so much easier to train because they can't get away from me. You know, you wouldn't tie a dog to a post and try and like bond with them there because that's just crazy. But yet we seem to think it's okay. I find it strange that it's still so common as well. You know, there are so many different species that you could have as a pet. Why are you choosing one that has wings and can fly and then taking that ability away from them? Because I think a lot of people don't realize that the flight muscles are essentially the muscles that are involved in breathing and the respiratory functions too. So when you restrict flight in that way, you're making the respiratory system less efficient. You're not having it work at its maximum capacity, which then over time is not working as well. It's not functioning as well. And then you add in things like toxins in the environment. You're asking for poor respiratory health going forward, but also just poor physical health overall. It's a really important form of exercise. So wing clipping is very controversial. It's not like you're not just cutting your hair. You're not just cutting their wings and it's going to be fine. It's a big part of their balance as well. You know, they have evolved to specifically have their wings in a certain way to balance and to fly and to move. And when we take that away from them, we're really doing them a disservice, as, you know, allowing them to be birds. But also the other thing that people are so worried about because they love their birds so much is they don't want them to fly away if somebody accidentally leaves the window open. But what people don't realize is you can do a horrendous clip on your birds and you can clip them all the way up to the top, which I have seen, and it's awful. I mean, any clipping is inappropriate, but all the way up to the top. And your bird can still fly. However, they have less control. So they can't do the maneuvers that they may need to get to safety or get up high in a tree if they were being, for example, chased by a crow or a magpie if they were to get outside. It's a lot safer if your bird is going to accidentally escape if they have their full wings so that they can actually evade these predators and that kind of thing. Of course, we don't want our birds to escape, but accidents happen. Your bird is more likely to survive if they actually have the physical capabilities to be able to fly and to come back to you if you've done that training with them. But it is one of those things that I really hope is going to be a cultural change going forward, because there is no scientific backing to say that this is better for their welfare. If it was better for them, they would have evolved to look that way and to be that way. But actually, we're doing it for human convenience rather than what's better for the bird.
It's so interesting. And I mean, I've seen injuries from crash landings, particularly because, you know, going from flight feathers and being able to fly, then suddenly having wing clips. I agree with you. I think, you know, not only the safety if they get out, but see them coming crashing down in the wrong spot in front of cars and whatnot. It's terrible, terrible, terrible. So I'm in agreement with you there. So the other big contentious subject online in particular is diet. It's another topic where there is so much misinformation. What are some of the biggest nutritional mistakes that owners are making without even realizing?
Diet is something I'm really passionate about, and I could talk about it for hours, and it is very controversial, and there are a multitude of ways to do it right, a lot of ways to do it wrong as well. And there has been there's been like 3 waves in terms of parrot diets. So the first wave was an all seed diet is perfect. That'll do it. You know, birds like seeds. That's great. Except we realized that an all seed diet is deficient in a wide variety of vitamins and minerals. So then we thought, you know what, we're going to develop this pellet, this kind of kibble type thing, and that's going to solve all of our problems. Except, unfortunately, an all pellet diet does not solve all of our problems. There's a huge challenge there, which I'll talk about in a moment. But now we're seeing more and more, we're actually looking to wild type diets, and we're seeing what do birds actually eat in the wild? What can we offer them in our homes? What is bioavailable? What can they actually extract nutrition from? What's the best possible choices for them? So whilst having some pellets in the diet may be fine, we also want to really hone in on getting them to eat those fresh foods like vegetables and sprouted seeds, grains and legumes and microgreens, and a little bit of fruit is fine. We're looking at herbs and flowers and all these kinds of things. They don't just eat a pellet in the wild, and that's fine. There's a wide variety of things that they have evolved to eat. And of course, they can't eat everything from the wild because there are some things that are toxic. And that's why they would go to the clay licks to consume that to help with digestion and things. But we do need to be quite mindful about how their digestive system works. Now, when it comes to pellets, not all pellets are created equal. There are some very good ones, and there are some ones that I would not recommend feeding. What I always say to anybody who's interested in any kind of formulated food or any food that's not, a carrot or something, have a look at the ingredients list and see whether that is something you want to put into your bird, because unfortunately, a lot of them do contain sugar because that makes them more palatable. However, if you're putting sugar into this, crazy bouncing little toddler-like creature, you're going to have more challenges because they don't need that excess artificial sugars and colours and flavourings and things in their diet. We want to be making sure we're giving them whole foods because that's what's bioavailable. But equally, when you are offering things like pellets, we also want to make sure that we're storing them correctly, because one of the big things that parrots struggle with in terms of health is vitamin A deficiency. And of course, we want to feed a formulated pellet because that's going to cover all those bases. However, a lot of people don't realize how unstable vitamin A is. So if it's exposed to light, air, heat, just existing, basically, the vitamin A starts to break down. So by the time you actually get to the end of that bag of pellets, there may not even be any vitamin A in there. And not only that, it's a vitamin A isolate. So it's just the vitamin A. Whereas when we're looking at whole foods like your butternut squash and carrots and sweet potato, there's other things, beta carotene and stuff involved in that, and different enzymes and stuff that actually makes this stuff more bioavailable, easy to digest, and they can get more out of it. So diet is a very controversial and touchy subject, and everybody's got an opinion. I have done a certificate in animal nutrition where I focused on parrots. My final project was on green cheek conures. But for me, diversity is really, really key when it comes to a parrot's diet, really looking at what's safe, what's toxic, what might be good to offer them, and also just thinking about making it enriching for them, because feeding just a bowl of any one thing is never going to be good. It's always going to be deficient in something. But if we're providing huge variety of different things in the correct portion sizing, it's going to be much more enriching for our birds, and it's going to be better for their health overall as well.
And before I lose the opportunity, because I know we're running out of time, and there's so much we can talk about, and hopefully we'll be able to do another conversation and tackle some of the things that we've missed today. But when you're discussing, you spoke about the fact that a lot of these diets are very sugary, and you suggested that you obviously weigh your birds every day. How do owners recognize obesity and their birds being overweight? Because obviously we're looking out for weight loss, particularly for signs of illness. How do you advise owners to monitor for them being overweight and tackling that problem?
It's a challenge because, the number on the scale doesn't necessarily mean that your bird is overweight or underweight. It's a number, and we need to know what is normal for our birds. With our 4 green cheek conures and with our 4 cockatiels, they all have different weights, but that's normal for that individual bird. So we need to know what's normal for our birds. It's always good to get a good workup with your avian vet so they can tell you. But if you can either be taught or you can do this yourself at home, is to actually feel their keel bone, because you can feel their keel bone and the muscle or fat around it and get an idea of whether they are a good weight or not. So you should always be able to feel that keel bone, the sternum, that sticky out bit. That's always going to be there. However, if you're kind of feeling around there and there's kind of a lot of pudgy, kind of squishy stuff going on, or maybe it's sticking out and you've kind of got an indent where you've got kind of a lot of muscle or fat going on, then your bird is probably on the chunkier side and maybe needs to do some more flight recall and things, because that is another thing we see with, the wing clipping, is we see either obesity or we see muscle atrophy, so the wastage as well, because they're not getting that exercise. But if your bird is underweight, you'll often see it kind of go inwards. So the keel bone will be sticking out really, really pointy, and there won't be a huge amount of muscle or fat or anything either side of it. It should be firm, not too firm, but not too squishy. It's one of those things you have to kind of learn. So if you are going to see your avian vet, maybe they can show you what's normal and what's not, and you can feel the different areas. But it is good to be mindful of those numbers on the scales and how that correlates to whether our birds are overweight or underweight, because weight going down is obviously very concerning, whether they're eating or whether they are sick. But also weight going up can not just mean being overweight, it could mean that maybe some eggs are on the way. So there's a lot that can be told by that, but we need to know whether there's going to be that's a normal number on the scale, or what is normal for our individual bird.
Good point. I forgot about the females. What would you say birds have taught you personally? How have they affected you?
I think birds have given me the patience of a saint because they are so challenging. Whether that's been when I've been working as a zookeeper or being at home with my own birds, you have to be patient with them. If you lose your temper, if you lose your cool and you can't cope with the noise and the mess and everything like that, then it's going to be incompatible sharing your life with birds. So patience is something, I think that's a requirement if you want to live with birds. You need to develop that as a skill. You may not have it now, but definitely working on it is something that's important, and that's something that I think that they've really taught me.
And funny, after everything you've learned working with birds and living with them in your home, what is the one thing that you hope people understand most about birds after listening to this conversation?
I hope people understand that they are more than just a decoration or a toy or just, a fun little animal that they've seen on social media that they can then share their lives with. I hope that people understand that there's so much more to it, that they're not simple, they're not cheap, they're not easy. They're actually quite difficult and complex creatures. And if you're prepared for that and you're prepared to maybe give one of these birds who's in a rescue centre a loving forever home, then that's brilliant. But also it's okay to say that maybe these aren't right for me. Maybe I can just enjoy them from a distance and then not have them in my home as well. Maybe support conservation projects that are supporting wild parrots instead.
Yeah, great advice. It's been such a fascinating conversation. Obviously, you are very active on social media. Sophie, the Bird Nerd. I love that name. If people want to access you or use your services, they can access you through your Instagram page. Where else can they find you?
Yep, so you can find me just about everywhere. So me personally, I'm Bird Nerd Sophie on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. But you can also find our business at Best Behaved Birds on Facebook and Instagram and bestbehavedbirds.com. And we offer parrot training consultations to people globally. And we also have our range of healthy parrot food, foraging mixes and things like that too. So we would love to come and see you. So you can find me on YouTube, as I said, Bird Nerd Sophie. And my partner is David, the parrot teacher. And we've got about 850 free videos across our channels with parrot education. So hopefully you'll find something useful in there.
Absolutely. So many resources to access. Thank you. Thank you for all you do and that you put out there. You have a great channel. It's fascinating to watch. I really enjoy it. And I've loved this conversation. It's taught me a lot.
Thank you for having me.
Sophie.
I appreciate it.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode on the Pause and Effect podcast. If you found the discussion helpful, please like, share, and follow our podcast. Don't forget to leave us a comment or review. We love hearing from our listeners. Remember, you can listen to us on your preferred podcast platform. Welcome back to Just for Pets. You're with Dr. Cara.
Hi, Doc. It's Jackson the Jack Rossi here. And boy, am I itchy.
Are you on a hypoallergenic diet?
Hyper what now?
Changing to a special diet will really help. And Just for Pets have a massive range. And flea and tick medication, special shampoo.
Ooh, how quick can you get some?
Order today and we'll deliver pronto.
I feel better already.
Justforpets.co.za. Vet approved, pet adored. Get it all to your door.